Satanism has always lived in the space between fear and fascination, a word capable of provoking outrage, curiosity, and myth in equal measure. But few figures embodied that tension more than Michael Aquino. He was a U.S. Army officer operating within the structured machinery of government and would ultimately reshape modern Satanism. His life would become a collision of discipline and defiance, symbolism and reality. So join me as we step into the dark ritual chamber and explore the story of Michael Aquino and the Temple of Set and theistic Satanism here on Mystery Archives. Michael Angelo Aquino Jr. was born on October 16, 1946, in San Francisco, California. He was the son of Michael A. Aquino Sr. and Betty Ford, and from a young age, he demonstrated discipline and leadership potential. As a teenager in Santa Barbara, Aquino became deeply involved in the Boy Scouts of America, ultimately achieving the rank of Eagle Scout. In fact, he graduated from Santa Barbara High School in 1964 as an Eagle Scout, and later served as a national commander of an Eagle Scout Honor Society. This early distinction hinted at the ambition and organizational talent that would characterize Aquino's later endeavors in both the military and religious spheres. Following high school, Aquino enrolled at the University of California, Santa Barbara. There, he majored in political science and participated in the Reserve Officers Training Corps program, which paved the way for his military career. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science in 1968, graduating as a Distinguished Military Graduate of the Army, ROTC, an honor that conferred upon him a regular Army officer's commission upon graduation. Upon receiving his Army commission in 1968, Michael Aquino embarked on a military career during a tumultuous period of American history. The United States was deeply involved in the Vietnam War, and Aquino's first assignments reflected that reality. He was trained as a specialist in psychological warfare, a discipline focused on influencing enemy morale and perceptions, a fitting speciality for someone who would later delve into the psychology of religion and magic. In 1969, as a young lieutenant, Aquino was deployed to Vietnam with the 6th PSYOP Battalion, an Army unit dedicated to psychological operations. He later recounted that he directed PSYOP campaigns from a base in Lai Kyi, South Vietnam. His duties included crafting propaganda, analyzing enemy propaganda, and attempting to win the hearts and minds of the local population and enemy troops through leaflets, broadcasts, and other non-lethal means. It was challenging work conducted amid an active war zone. Aquino would recall writing notes or reading literature in moments between operations, sometimes interrupted by incoming rocket fire and the rush to bomb shelters. This environment honed his ability to focus under pressure and perhaps fostered a lifelong interest in how belief systems and narratives can affect human behavior, a theme that would resonate in his later occult writings. While in Vietnam, Aquino also found an outlet for his creative and philosophical interests. In his spare moments, surrounded by those realities of war, he started writing an occult-inspired manuscript he titled The Diablicon. As he later explained, he was inspired by John Milton's Paradise Lost and its depictions of Satan as a complex, even heroic figure. Aquino began composing the Diablicon in early 1970 during lulls in his military duties, writing in bombed-out buildings and jungle encampments. The text was a reinterpretation of the war in heaven, the biblical story of the rebel angel's expulsion, told from the perspective of Satan and his fellow fallen angels. Aquino imagined these beings not as evil caricatures, but as principled entities championing individual will and enlightenment against what they saw as a tyrannical cosmic order. In essence, the Diablicon was a statement of Aquino's emerging personal philosophy, a form of Satanism that emphasized Satan or Lucifer as a symbol of radical individualism, knowledge, and defiance of orthodoxy. By March of 1970, still in Vietnam, Aquino completed the Diablicon and sent the manuscript back to the United States. He forwarded it to Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, who responded with enthusiasm, recognizing the literary effort as a valuable contribution to Satanic thought. This exchange is significant because it shows that Aquino, even before meeting LaVey in person, was actively engaging with and contributing to the Satanic movement intellectually. His wartime writings served as a bridge between his military life and his occult interests, demonstrating how he could compartmentalize and pursue both tracks simultaneously. By 1971, Aquino had returned from Vietnam to the United States. His military career at that point paused briefly as he immersed himself more deeply into the burgeoning Satanic movement of the late 1960s and early 1970s America. With his uniform and a head full of esoteric ideas, the stage was set for the next chapter of his life, joining forces with Anton LaVey's Church of Satan and quickly rising through its ranks. The Church of Satan had been founded by Anton LaVey in 1966 and had garnered public attention with theatrical rituals and celebrity associates. In March 1969, shortly before deploying to Vietnam, Michael Aquino and his first wife Janet attended an event at LaVey's infamous Black House in San Francisco. The event was a lecture on fortune-telling and character analysis, but Aquino found himself more fascinated by LaVey and the ambiance of modern Satanism, rather than the lecture itself. Soon after, Aquino and Janet sent in their applications for membership to the Church of Satan, signaling the beginning of Aquino's formal involvement in organized Satanism. Even though his active participation was briefly interrupted by his Vietnam tour, Aquino remained in correspondence with Church of Satan members and LaVey himself. After returning to the U.S. in 1971, Aquino resumed his activities with renewed energy. That year, LaVey ordained Aquino as a Satanic priest, the second degree, known in the church as the Priest of Mendes, and authorized him to found a local grotto or chapter in his home. Aquino's home Satanic group became an active grotto, conducting rituals and study meetings, effectively bringing the Church of Satan's work to the community's level. Aquino's rise through the ranks was swift. Only 2 years after joining, he had attained the 4th degree rank of Magister Caverns, indicating a senior leadership position within the church's hierarchy. He took on multiple responsibilities. He became the editor of the Cloven Hoof, the Church of Satan's newsletter and official publication. In this role, Aquino wrote articles, disseminating LaVey's announcements, and helping shape the intellectual discourse of the church. He also contributed to LaVey's The Satanic Rituals in 1972 by writing portions of text, providing rituals with historic and esoteric flair. For example, Aquino authored The Ceremony of the Stifling Air and The Call to Cthulhu Rituals. In October of 1970, as a relatively new priest, Aquino had performed what is noted as the first Missa Solemnis ritual with the Church of Satan. The ritual was a solemn Satanic mass that underscored his devotion and showmanship. He also officiated at one of the earliest Satanic weddings on record, the second ever performed under the church. These activities demonstrated Aquino's flair for ritual and earned him respect among his peers. Within the church's governing body, the ruling Council of Nine, Aquino secured a seat, meaning that he was one of LaVey's trusted inner circle advisors. He became in effect LaVey's right hand during the early 1970s. The two men were close. They first met not in a dark ritual chamber, but at a San Francisco film screening of Rosemary's Baby. After the showing, LaVey reportedly handed Aquino his business card, and impressed by the young man's evident interest in Satanic themes. This chance meeting sparked a mentorship. LaVey and Aquino bonded over their shared interests in Satanism, philosophical underpinnings, and the pageantry of ritual. LaVey appreciated Aquino's military-like discipline and scholarly approach, while Aquino was drawn to LaVey's charisma and the boldness of creating a religion centered on Satan. They grew to be very close. During these years, Aquino would later recall that the Church of Satan's rituals often felt genuinely charged with a presence, an extra-physical or supernatural force, which he and others interpreted as the literal Satan or Prince of Darkness making himself known. Aquino observed that even LaVey, who outwardly spoke of Satan in symbolic terms, behaved during ceremonies not as an actor playing a role, but as a sincere priest of a dark power. This impression would inform Aquino's later theological divergence from LaVey's stance. By the mid-1970s, Michael Aquino stood at the pinnacle within the Church of Satan. However, fault lines were forming beneath the surface. The organization was grappling with an internal identity crisis. Was Satan merely a symbol for materialistic self-indulgence, as LaVey often told the media, or was Satan an actual metaphysical being with whom practitioners could commune with? Many early Church of Satan members, Aquino among them, privately leaned toward a literal or semi-literal belief in Satan as an entity. LaVey's public atheism clashed with some of the experiences that some members felt in ritual. For a time, this ambiguity was left unpoliced. It allowed the church to attract both skeptics drawn to Satan as a metaphor and occultists who sensed a genuine dark force in their workings. Aquino later claimed that LaVey himself revealed to him in 1974 a secret pact with Satan that LaVey had allegedly written, implying that even the founder harbored a genuine belief in the being that they called Satan. No one else ever saw this pact, and scholars debate whether LaVey meant it sincerely or allegorically. Regardless, by 1974, Aquino's and LaVey's views on the nature of Satanism were subtly diverging. Aquino was gravitating towards a theistic or esoteric type of Satanism, one that acknowledged spiritual realities, whereas LaVey increasingly presented Satanism as an aesthetic, a carnal philosophy using Satan as a symbol of rebellion and ego. The breaking point came in 1975. The Church of Satan, despite its notoriety and colorful ceremonies, was not a large or wealthy organization, and LaVey often struggled financially. In May 1975, while Aquino was editing an issue of the Cloven Hoof, LaVey sent him a draft article announcing a controversial new policy. Henceforth, higher initiatory degrees in the Church of Satan could be obtained in exchange for financial or material contributions. In other words, LaVey proposed to sell the priesthood and the higher titles for cash or valuable gifts, rather than awarding them purely on merit or magical achievement. The draft stated, as Aquino later quoted, that professional services, funds, real estate, objects of value, etc., which contribute to the tangible worldly success of the Church of Satan, are qualification for elevation. Aquino was stunned. He viewed this as a critical corruption of everything that the church had stood for, a betrayal of the principle, and a descent into crass commercialization. He cordially but forcefully objected to LaVey, attempting to dissuade him from this course. But despite Aquino's protests and alternative suggestions for raising funds, LaVey remained adamant. The newsletter would publish his policy as written, and anyone that was dissatisfied could leave. When this decision became public to the church's membership, it ignited a firestorm. Many dedicated satanic priests and priestesses were indeed infuriated by what they saw as a sellout move. Among them was High Priestess Lilith Sinclair, the East Coast leader who had co-founded a New York grotto and who shared Aquino's theistic leanings. Lilith Sinclair, who would later become Aquino's second wife, felt as betrayed as he did. In open disgust, she and a number of other prominent members resigned from the Church of Satan in the spring of 1975. Letters of resignation poured into Aquino's mailbox from around the country. By late June of 1975, the Church of Satan, as originally constituted, had effectively collapsed, with dozens of key members, including nearly the entire Council of Nine, leaving LaVey's organization. Aquino himself formally tendered his resignation letter in a letter to Anton LaVey and Diane LaVey on June 10th of 1975, explicitly repudiating their decision to commercialize the degrees. In that letter, Aquino declared that the church's infernal mandate, the mandate supposedly given by Satan to lead humanity, was withdrawn from LaVey. Aquino did not take this step lightly. In the weeks between LaVey's announcement and Aquino's resignation, he struggled to resolve the crisis. He exchanged extensive correspondence with other members, hoping that LaVey might reverse course. But LaVey was resolute, perhaps believing that attracting wealthy patrons was necessary for the church's survival, or possibly viewing the whole religious edifice as something that he could modify at will for practical reasons. Faced with this impasse, Aquino decided that if Satan's church had been corrupted by ego and greed, then Satan, or the Prince of Darkness as Aquino preferred to say, would have to intervene directly to set things straight. Aquino later explained his mindset that he still revered Anton LaVey for originally inspiring modern Satanism, but he felt that LaVey had abandoned his own vision in that fateful spring of 1975. And to Aquino, the essence of Satan, as a powerful cosmic force of individualism and enlightenment, needed a new vehicle if the Church of Satan could no longer serve. And so, with equal measure of indignation and mystical fervor, he prepared to undertake a bold ritual that would change the course of contemporary Satanism forever. On the night of June 21st, 1975, the summer solstice, Michael Aquino performed a solitary ritual that would become the foundational event of a new religious movement. Conducting what he called a greater black magic working, Aquino sought guidance from the Prince of Darkness on how to continue this satanic tradition outside of LaVey's shadow. He performed the ritual at his home in Santa Barbara, casting a magical circle and using the tools of satanic ceremony he had mastered. By his own account, Aquino recited invocations and focused his will, essentially asking, "What is the will of Satan now?" "I asked Satan for advice on what to do next," Aquino recalled. The answer he received would become legend among his followers. According to Aquino, in the dark, still hours of that summer solstice night, something profound occurred. He described experiencing a presence, an ageless intelligence of the universe, manifesting in response to his call, and what Aquino later categorized as an episode of automatic writing or inspired dictation. His hand began to write words unbidden. Over the course of that night and early morning, he produced a text titled The Book of Coming Forth by Night. This document, Aquino claimed, was not composed from his conscious mind. Rather, it was a revelation from the entity he had invoked, an entity that identified itself by a very ancient name. In the book, the speaker announced, "I, Satan, appear now in the form of Set," declaring that Satan was actually a mask or misnomer for the true Prince of Darkness. The being said it no longer wished to be addressed by the Hebrew-derived name Satan, which had become confused by centuries-old cultural baggage, but instead by Set, the name it was called in ancient Egypt. Set was the god of darkness, storms, and desert places in Egyptian mythology, a complex figure who, unlike the purely evil Satan of Christian lore, had both destructive and protective aspects. The Book of Coming Forth by Night is a brief text, but loaded with implications. In it, Aquino, addressed personally by name, is proclaimed to be the new Magus. The text acknowledges Anton LaVey as having carried an infernal mandate for a time, a reconsecration that began in 1966, year one of Satanism, but declares that LaVey's era is over. Set, speaking through the text, effectively deposed LaVey as the representative of the dark powers and transferred that mantle to Aquino. Aquino's mandate was to found a new temple that would carry forward the true essence of the Satanic, now Setian religion. The text even directly referenced Aleister Crowley's precedent, just as Crowley had received the Book of the Law in 1904 and declared a new eon of Horus. Aquino's reception of Coming Forth by Night marked the dawning of the eon of Set. The document furthermore introduces the concept of keeper, an Egyptian word meaning "I have come into being," or to become. It implies that the word of the new eon is keeper, a principle of self-directed evolution or transformation. Keeper would become the central philosophical tenet of Aquino's new religion, encapsulating the idea that through magic and self-realization, an individual can become spiritually evolved into something greater. Aquino emerged from this intense mystical experience feeling, by his own admission, stunned and profoundly changed. He spent the following days analyzing and interpreting what he had written in the trance-like state. Even for Aquino, who had expected perhaps a symbolic vision or personal inspiration, the formality and clarity of the text were surprising. He hadn't anticipated that the answer to his ritual would be the announcement of a new eon, and essentially a directive to start a new church. Without wasting time, Aquino took action to fulfill the mandate. He shared his new book with the other disenfranchised Satanists who had resigned with him. And on the very next day, June 22nd of 1975, he began gathering a new group of followers around this revelation, many of those who had left the Church of Satan. Priests, priestesses, and dedicated members across the country responded enthusiastically. By September of 1975, Aquino circulated a letter to the emerging priesthood of the new organization, outlining the principles of what would be called the Temple of Set. He articulated that the Temple of Set was not founded in opposition to the Church of Satan per se, but as the next step of evolution of the left-hand path tradition. Nevertheless, the temple's creation was undeniably rooted in a schismatic response to LaVey's perceived failings, giving it a reformative character. On the bureaucratic side, Aquino moved to quickly formalize the Temple of Set. He, along with a group of initial trustees, drafted bylaws for the new entity and filed for incorporation as a nonprofit church in California. The Temple of Set was legally incorporated on the symbolic date of the northern autumnal equinox, 1975, which was September 21st of that year, and promptly applied for federal tax-exempt status as a religious organization. The status was then later granted within the year. The Council of Nine, a governing council intentionally echoing the name of the body that once guided the Church of Satan, was established to provide leadership beyond just the high priest. And initially, since many senior Satanists had come over, the Council of Nine featured individuals like Thomas Huddleston, Ronald K. Barrett, Lilith Sinclair, and Jenny Janine Bast, representing a geographic spread from Ohio to California. Dr. Aquino, of course, assumed the position of High Priest of Set and Magus of the new Eon, but notably, in the temple's founding documents, Aquino inserted a provision that the High Priesthood was not to be a lifetime personal office. The Temple of Set's early months were busy with both practical organization and the development of its distinct theology. Aquino penned a series of letters to the fledgling membership, explaining Setian concepts and how they differed from LaVeyan Satanism. One immediate change was theological. Whereas the Church of Satan under LaVey publicly espoused atheism and used Satan as a metaphor, the Temple of Set openly embraced theistic Satanism, or rather, Setianism. They proclaimed that Set is a real metaphysical entity, not a creator god, but a powerful, self-aware being or principle that represents isolate intelligence and individual divinity. In practice, this meant that Temple of Set members, or Setians, could approach Set as a deity or teacher in their magical work, rather than just treating him as an archetype. Aquino explained that Keeper was the process of coming into being, and each Setian's task was to cultivate their own self-development and spiritual evolution. Structurally, the Temple of Set also diverged from its predecessor. It established 6 degrees of initiation, expanding on the Church of Satan system. These were Setian 1 degree, Adept 2nd degree, Priest and Priestess of Set, the 3rd degree, Magister and Magistra Templi, the 4th degree, and Magus and Mega, 5th degree, and lastly, Ipsimus and Ipsima, the 6th degree. Advancement was based on recognition of personal growth and magical skill, and the higher the degrees were reserved for those who had made world-changing contributions to the philosophy. For instance, uttering a new word or concept beyond Keeper. Initially, Aquino as a founder was recognized as the Magus 5th degree for uttering Keeper, and in later years he would be acknowledged as Ipsimus, the 6th degree, the highest grade, in honor of his lifetime achievements. The Council of Nine was empowered to appoint or remove the High Priestess, ensuring some accountability. Early on, the council elected Magister Robert Ethel as the first chairman in late of 1975, indicating Aquino's willingness to distribute authority. By the end of 1975, the Temple of Set was fully operational. It had a growing body of members, many of them carryovers from the Church of Satan, but also new recruits drawn by media curiosity or occult networks. It published the first issue of its newsletter, The Scroll of Set, providing updates and essays to the membership. Aquino drafted foundational documents, notably the Crystal Tablet of Set, which served as an introductory guide and scripture of sorts for new initiates. The Book of Coming Forth by Night itself was treated with reverence, but not exactly as infallible scripture in a dogmatic sense. Rather, Setians saw it as a magical text that transferred Satan's mandate from LaVey's church to the Temple of Set. It was not to be taken on blind faith, but to be understood symbolically and personally, a product of Aquino's unconscious communion with Set, yet holding truths to be discovered through practice. In any case, for those who had been disillusioned by the Church of Satan's collapse, the events of 1975 were invigorating. Thus, by early 1976, Michael Aquino had transformed from Anton LaVey's lieutenant into the high priest of a new occult order. The young religion faced many challenges ahead, defining its practices, surviving public scrutiny, and weathering internal growing pains. But in those first moments of inception, it was marked by a heady sense of purpose and a clear ideological break from the past. The Eon of Set had begun, at least for a few hundred practitioners worldwide who heeded the call of the new dispensation. Ritual and magic in the Temple of Set took on a more hermetic and occult flavor than in LaVey's Church of Satan. While LaVey's group often staged relatively simple psychodramatic rituals, as in destroying an enemy's effigy or performing a mock baptism, Setian rites were typically more elaborate and rooted in historical magical traditions. Aquino was heavily influenced by the writings of Aleister Crowley, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and classical grimoires, as well as by ancient Egyptian religion. Under Aquino's guidance, the temple adopted and adapted practices like Enochian magic, the system of angelic and demonic calls originally developed by Elizabethan mage John Dee. In fact, Aquino became deeply engrossed in Enochian studies. Starting in March of 1975, just before the temple's founding, he'd begun a project to re-examine the Enochian keys, also called the Enochian calls, in their original form from Dee's diaries. He suspected that the angelic legend might hide ciphered meanings relevant to the new eon. Over 6 years, Aquino conducted workings to decode and reinterpret these keys for the Eon of Set. By 1981, he completed what he termed the Word of Set, essentially a Setian translation and commentary on the 19 Enochian keys. These keys, which in the Golden Dawn and LaVeyan systems had been used as invocations of infernal powers, were seen by Aquino as containing hidden messages that, when properly understood, aligned with Satanian philosophy. Aquino's Word of Set working finished exactly on April 13th of 1981, the anniversary of Dee's original reception in 1584, and was later published within the temple's literature. In Aquino's view, the Enochian entities contacted by Dee could be seen as cosmic intelligences, neither purely angelic nor demonic by simplistic definitions, that Setians might communicate with for knowledge. Another innovation were the orders within the Temple of Set. Orders are specialized magical fraternities focusing on particular traditions or goals. For example, Aquino revived the Order of the Trapezoid in the early 1980s as an order within the temple dedicated to exploring occult aspects of Gothic, Teutonic, and Lovecraftian magic. The Order of Horus was established to focus on chivalric ideas and the archetype of Set's brother or compatriot Horus, presumably cultivating the warrior philosopher aspects of initiation. There were also eventually an Order of Set, sometimes called the Order of Setne, Kumast, named after an ancient Egyptian sorcerer prince. This focused on Egyptian magic. There was also the Order of the Vampire, focusing on the concept of psychic vampirism and nocturnal archetypes, among others. Each order was led by a Magister Templi and accepted members who had at least reached Adept Second Degree and proven sincere interest. By policy, the Setian was expected to affiliate with one of the orders within the year of reaching the Second Degree Adept level. This was meant to ensure that one was advancing, one engaged deeply with some aspect of tradition, and was learning from their peers and contributing back to knowledge. The orders also fostered intellectual contributions. Many of the temple's publications and ideas originated in order projects. In parallel, the temple organized pylons, which were local groups or lodges where Setians in a particular region could meet, regardless of their order affiliation. Pylons were named often after stars or ancient sites. For example, Ruby Pylon in a city might gather members for a discussion and minor rituals. A pylon could include Setians of all degrees, providing a space for new initiates to learn from group ritual skills and for members to socialize and support each other in Keeper. The combination of pylons and orders gave the temple a decentralized yet interconnected character. This was quite different from the Church of Satan structure, which had local grottos, but no equivalent to the order system. By the late 1970s, the temple had grown modestly. It remained a small occult school rather than a mass religion. The leadership deliberately kept membership selective. Prospective members underwent an application and recognition period for up to 2 years, during which their sincerity and compatibility were evaluated. The temple claimed that fewer than half of all applicants were accepted into Satan initiation, reflecting its guarded approach to growth. As of 1984, an external estimate put membership around 500 individuals, spread across North America, Europe, and a few in other continents. The temple itself did not officially publish membership numbers, considering it internal information, but it acknowledged being primarily American, with a gradually expanding international presence. During this period, Michael Aquino also balanced another significant aspect of his life, his ongoing military career. In 1976, after finishing his MA, he had returned to active military service, albeit in a somewhat different capacity. He transitioned to the Army Reserve, but he was frequently on active duty assignments as what he called an active guard or reserve officer, essentially a reservist on full-time duty. In 1980, Dr. Aquino completed his PhD, and coincidentally that same year, he was assigned to an interesting role that leveraged his academic and PSYOP background. He co-authored a military paper titled From PSYOP to Mind War: The Psychology of Victory. This paper, written with Colonel Paul E. Vallely in 1980, advocated for the U.S. Army to extend psychological operations beyond tactical propaganda to a broader concept of mind war. Aquino and Vallely argued that psychotronic technologies and the total influence of communications, including possibly even paranormal factors, could be harnessed to affect the enemy's will to fight. Mind war suggested using all available media to create a state of victory consciousness in U.S. forces and defeatism in the enemy, ideally so that wars could be won with minimal violence. Although mind war was just a concept paper, never adopted as official doctrine, it later gained notoriety in conspiracy circles, cited as evidence of supposed military mind control programs. In truth, Aquino's interest in psychological warfare was of a piece with his occult work. Both dealt with how unseen forces, be they propaganda or magical will, can alter thoughts and reality. In 1981, Aquino served as a reserve attaché at the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C., and in 1982, he studied at the State Department's Foreign Service Institute. These roles gave him top-secret security clearances and exposure to high-level strategic thinking. All the while, he kept his religious life relatively private within military circles. By the late 1970s, some of Aquino's Army colleagues knew he was involved in a witchcraft or satanic church, but it was not yet a public issue. Indeed, in an era before the satanic panic broke out, a number of people in California's Bay Area occult scene, including law enforcement liaisons, regarded the Temple of Set as a somewhat intellectual, if not peculiar group. One notable episode in this time frame combined Aquino's military travels with his occult passion was the Wewelsburg working of 1982. Aquino had long been fascinated by the occult aspects of Nazi Germany, strictly from a scholarly and magical perspective. He was particularly interested in the lore surrounding Wewelsburg Castle in Westphalia, which under Heinrich Himmler's SS had been refurbished as a mystical HQ, complete with a circular Hall of the Dead crypt and a plush upper assembly hall with a sun wheel mosaic, often dubbed the Black Sun in the floor. In October 1982, While on a NATO liaison assignment in Europe, Aquino made a pilgrimage to Wewelsburg. With permission from the castle's curator, he gained access to the two legendary chambers that had been off limits for decades, the Open Gruppenführersaal, or the Upper Hall, and the crypt below it. On October 19, 1982, Aquino conducted a private ritual in the castle's North Tower crypt, the so-called Valhalla, or Hall of the Dead, at approximately 3 to 4:30 p.m. local time. He dubbed this magical experiment the Wewelsburg working. The aim, as he described in a letter to the priesthood later, was multifold: to tap into any remaining occult energy or resonance left from the intense focus the SS had placed on that spot, and to ritually awaken and reorient the Order of the Trapezoid, an occult order that had existed in prototype within the Church of Satan, and which he now wanted to fully energize within the Temple of Set. Aquino approached the Wewelsburg working with meticulous preparation. He had researched the castle's history and read accounts like Francis King's Satan and Swastika to understand what the Nazis might have attempted there. During the ritual, Aquino used one of the Enochian keys, specifically the 19th key, which in Dee's system opens the gates of the deepest ether. He later described an intense, meditative, and visionary experience. In that crypt, he perceived the magical epitaph of Nazi Germany, a realization that the Third Reich, in fighting what it saw as materialism and decadence, had ironically unleashed a dark archetype, the Order of the Trapezoid, symbolizing authoritarian occult power, which could reassert itself in new forms. At one point, he felt as if he had drained the lingering occult battery that the castle represented, leaving it magically inert after 40 years of dormancy. The result for Aquino personally was invigorating. Having drunk at this magical fountain of youth, I myself felt energized, he wrote afterwards. Crucially, Aquino believed that the ritual opened the gate of Wewelsburg for the Eon of Set. In his esoteric interpretation, the Church of Satan and Temple of Set had already been casting the shadow of an archetype, the trapezoid or the Black Sun, without fully realizing it. By performing the working at the epicenter of Nazi occult myth, he aimed to consciously take up the archetype and integrate it positively into Setian practice. In effect, the Order of the Trapezoid was reconstituted as a formal magical order within the Temple of Set following this work. It attracted those interested in rune magic, Germanic pagan lore, the metaphysics of geometry. The trapezoid and angles held special significance, aligned with LaVey's old law of the trapezoid, which stated that certain geometric forms can induce magical effects. Aquino even designed a new emblem for the Order of the Trapezoid, a version of the Wolfsangel rune within the trapezoid, reflecting its left-hand path mission. This intersection of Nazi symbol mysticism and Setian practice could have been easily misunderstood, and indeed it sometimes was. However, Aquino consistently clarified that his interest was academic and magical, not political or racial. Interestingly, the Wewelsburg working had ripple effects outside the temple. Occult historian Nicholas Goodright Clark notes that Aquino's ritual sparked a new occult fascination within Wewelsburg in the wider community. The local museum curator, Daniela Seppi, observed that after the Temple of Set's working, many more inquiries and occult tours came, each with divergent teachings, indicating that Wewelsburg had become a sort of magnet in occult subculture. The temple remained fairly known in occult circles, but not to the general public, but that was about to change as the decade progressed. In the mid-1980s, the United States was seized by a growing hysteria about alleged satanic cults lurking in daycares, churches, and suburban neighborhoods. This phenomenon, now often referred to as the Satanic Panic, was a moral panic fueled by a convergence of factors: sensational media reports, a handful of now discredited recovered memory accounts of satanic ritual abuse, and anxieties over changing social norms. Virtually overnight, occult practitioners who had operated in relative obscurity found themselves cast as potential villains in the public's imaginations. Dr. Michael Aquino, as a prominent and unusual figure, an army officer openly heading a Satanic Setian religious group, became one of the unintended targets of this panic. The trouble for Aquino specifically began at the U.S. Army base known as the Presidio of San Francisco, where he had been stationed. In the early 1980s, Aquino had returned to his hometown on military assignment, and from 1980 to 1986, when he was serving as an active guard reserve officer at the Presidio, he was dealing largely with personnel and administrative duties. He and Lilith lived in San Francisco during these years and were well known in the local occult community. They even converted part of their Victorian house in the Russian Hill neighborhood into a ritual chamber, decorated with satanic imagery for temple ceremonies. In 1986, the Presidio became the focus of a horrific accusation. Children at the Presidio Child Development Center, a daycare on base, were found to show signs of sexual abuse. Initial investigations by the Army's Criminal Investigation Division and the San Francisco Police pointed to a civilian daycare employee by the name of Gary Hambright, who was arrested in 1987 on multiple counts of molestation. This was part of the broader wave of daycare abuse allegations at the time, the McMartin preschool trial in Southern California being the most famous example. In the Presidio case, some children described bizarre, ritualistic elements to the abuse, talk of dark rooms, candles, and an evil figure by the name of Mikey. These details led investigators to consider the possibility of a satanic element. Since Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino was one of the few individuals at the Presidio openly associated with Satanism, and indeed somewhat of a local celebrity in that regard, suspicion drifted towards him and his wife. The critical incident occurred on August 12th of 1987. A 3-year-old girl who had attended the daycare was with her father, an Army chaplain named Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Larry Adams Thompson, at the Presidio's post exchange, when she reportedly became visibly upset at seeing Aquino and Lilith walk by. According to her father's later report, the toddler pointed at Aquino, identifiable by his striking appearance. Aquino often had an unusual haircut with a peaked widow's peak and dramatically arched eyebrows, and called him Mikey and referred to Lilith as Shambi. This prompted the chaplain to alert investigators, as his daughter was one of those being evaluated for possible abuse at the daycare. In a subsequent interview with an FBI agent, the little girl allegedly said that Mikey and Shambi and Mr. Gary had all been involved in molesting her and other children, taking them to Mr. Gary's house for that purpose. This was an explosive allegation, essentially accusing a decorated Army officer and his wife of participating in a pedophilic satanic cult. By the time this accusation surfaced, the general investigation into the daycare had found that dozens of children, eventually over 50, showed signs consistent with abuse or trauma. Parents of victims had filed a $60 million lawsuit against the Army for negligence. And although Hambright was the primary suspect and was indicted by a federal grand jury, rumors of multiple perpetrators and of ritual abuse elements, such as animal mutilations, photographs taken, or strange markings on kids, were rampant. The Aquinos, due to their unusual religion, became prime suspects in the eyes of some investigators, despite a lack of direct physical evidence linking them to any crime. In November of 1987, the San Francisco Police Department formally opened an investigation into the Aquinos and their possible connection to the Presidio abuse case, and media coverage followed. In these interviews, Aquino pointed out the flimsiness of their case. Neither he nor Lilith had ever been caretakers at the daycare, and there was no physical evidence, no DNA, no photographs, nothing seized from his home that substantiated any wrongdoing. And none of the dozens of other children had independently identified the Aquinos except the one child of the chaplain. Indeed, in August 1988, after extensive searches and forensic tests, the SFPD closed its criminal investigation of the Aquinos, citing insufficient evidence to charge them. However, the Army's CID continued its own probe a bit longer. The CID had been very sensitive to the public relations nightmare of a satanic child abuse scandal on an Army base, and they pursued all leads thoroughly. It wasn't until August 1989 that they issued a final report. That report named Michael Aquino and initially Lilith in the title block, essentially listing them as subjects of the investigation. Yet the conclusion was that the case was being closed because all remaining leads had gone cold, and importantly, the 3-year statute of limitations for any potential charges had expired by June of 1989. In practical terms, this meant that even if new evidence came to light, it was legally too late to prosecute under military law. The CID report cryptically noted that while Aquino had offered evidence of an alibi, indeed the Aquinos had been away in Washington, D.C. during the months the key incident supposedly happened, they did not find his alibi persuasive enough to completely exonerate him in their internal records. This remark indicated that some investigators harbored suspicions, even absent of proof. After the CID closed the case, the Aquinos took steps to clear their names. In January of 1990, they formally requested the CID to remove their names from the report's title block, arguing that since no charges were brought, they should not be listed as offenders in any official capacity. The CID agreed in part, and they removed Lilith Aquino's name, reasoning that the child's identifications of her were not adequate. But the CID refused to remove Michael Aquino's name, leaving the inference that he was still a person of interest in an unresolved matter. Frustrated by this, Aquino filed a lawsuit under the Privacy Act to force the Army to amend its records and to seek damages for the harm that he believed the false report had done to his career. The case went to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which in 1992 ultimately ruled against Aquino on technical grounds. It held that because the CID's file was part of law enforcement systems, it was exempt from the Privacy Act amendment provisions, and that the Army's decision not to change it was not arbitrary or capricious, given probable cause had existed to investigate. Essentially, while Aquino had never been charged, the court recognized that the Army had enough initial evidence, the child's identification of him, to justify the investigation and retention of the record. Aquino was thus unable to get the official records purged, a fact that he resented as a lingering stain on his honor. The damage was done in the court of public opinion. Aquino became one of the public faces of the alleged sinister network of Satanists that conspiracy theorists insisted were behind daycare abuses nationwide. He and Lilith found themselves socially ostracized in some quarters and literally harassed. Windows of their home were smashed by unknown vandals. They received threats and hate mail. In the Bay Area press, they were sometimes treated as suspects, even after the case was closed. From a broader perspective, the Aquino case was a microcosm of the Satanic Panic's tragedy. Lives and careers were harmed by utterly unfounded allegations. The Aquinos, though never charged, effectively saw Michael's Army career ended. A continuation board in 1990 chose not to extend his active duty tour, which meant that he reverted to part-time reserve status until mandatory retirement 4 years later at lieutenant colonel. He did receive an honorable retirement and a meritorious service medal in 1994, but any prospect of further promotion was gone. The public controversies of the 1980s did have a side effect. They propelled Michael Aquino onto national television, making him possibly the most recognized Satanist after Anton LaVey. Whereas LaVey's had shunned TV talk shows in the 1980s, Aquino stepped forward to represent the Satanic or Setian point of view in a number of high-profile programs. In 1988, for example, Aquino and Lilith appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show in an episode about satanic worship. Aquino calmly explained the philosophy of the Temple of Set and rebutted what he called ridiculous accusations. On Oprah's show, when pressed about whether Setians commit crimes, he delivered a soundbite. "We are not servants of some god. We are our own gods," stressing personal responsibility and denying any interest in harming children. He attempted to demystify Satanism and Setianism for the audience, describing it as a lawful but misunderstood religion. Aquino's most infamous TV appearance, however, was on Geraldo Rivera's primetime special, Devil Worship, Exposing Satan's Underground, which aired in October of 1988 on NBC. This show, seen by tens of millions, was a sensationalistic montage of crimes, hearsay, and interviews meant to convince viewers of a hidden satanic epidemic. Aquino agreed to be interviewed by Rivera, likely hoping to inject reason into the discussion. He appeared in full Temple of Set priestly regalia, including a cape, pentagram medallion, and his distinct widow's peak, which visually played into stereotypes of his satanic high priest. However, what Aquino said was rational and defensive. He denied any satanic conspiracy. He clarified that his temple had nothing to do with any said crimes, and decried the witch hunt mentality gripping law enforcement. Rivera in tabloid fashion was not especially sympathetic, but Aquino's presence gave a face to the accused, and many later remarked that he came across as composed under hostile questioning. Throughout the adversities of the late 80s, the Temple of Set itself endured. The membership may have contracted somewhat due to negative publicity, but it also fostered a kind of us against the world mentality. Notably, a few prominent members even joined the Temple of Set during the Satanic Panic, finding Aquino's integrity appealing. One striking example is Zena LaVey Schreck, the daughter of Anton LaVey. In 1990, amid personal disputes with her father and disillusionment with the Church of Satan's direction under her parents, Zena defected and sought refuge in the Temple of Set. She renounced her father publicly for a time and was an active Setian, eventually attaining the rank of High Priestess in 2002. Her husband, Nicholas Schreck, also worked with the temple. The irony was rich. The daughter of the founder of modern Satanism found Aquino's Setian approach more genuine and ethical than her own father's organization. Although Zena left the Temple of Set within a couple of years of being made High Priestess, she and Aquino had differences and she moved on to other spiritual paths. Her involvement underscored the temple's resilience and legitimacy in the eyes of some significant occultists. In 1996, after 21 years as the High Priest of Set, Aquino formally resigned from that office, and the temple's Council of Nine selected Don Webb, a master of the temple and talented Setian author from Texas, to succeed him. Magus Don Webb took over leadership, marking the first transfer of high priesthood in the temple's history, not caused by a schism, but a peaceful succession. This was a milestone that demonstrated the temple's maturation beyond a founder-led group. The Webb years, 1996 to 2002, saw the temple maintain continuity while evolving in new directions. Around the same time, Aquino finally saw one of his longtime goals realized. The Temple of Set established a stable presence on the internet. In 1994, as the World Wide Web blossomed, the temple launched an early online forum, eventually a password-protected site called Kipora.org, and later then a public website. Aquino, ever tech-savvy, welcomed the cyber presence, and even wrote about the concept of a cyber temple, a virtual space where Setians worldwide could convene outside of physical restraints. This move helped the temple reach more potential seekers globally and adapt to the changing times. Throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, Aquino remained a prolific writer. In 2002, he published a massive 2-volume tome called The Secret History of the Church of Satan, in which he correlated documents, correspondences, and his personal narrative of the Satanic schism. While admittedly partisan, this work has been cited by academics as an important, if not somewhat contentious, chronicle of that era. Aquino's relationship with the Church of Satan's remnants saw a kind of closure in these later years. Anton LaVey died in 1997, and the Church of Satan leadership was passed to Blanche Barton, LaVey's partner, and later to Peter H. Gilmore. With LaVey gone, the personal animosity cooled somewhat. In 2004, at the funeral of LaVey's older daughter Carla LaVey's fiancé, Michael Aquino and Carla met amicably, suggesting some healing of old wounds. Additionally, Aquino collaborated in 2013 with Stanton LaVey, Anton's grandson, on a whimsical project, the 50th anniversary revision of the Satanic Bible. In the 2010s, Aquino continued to write and refine his earlier work. He updated Mind War into a full-length book in 2013, expanding on the idea of psychological warfare with reflections on how mass media and even psychic phenomena could be harnessed ethically for national defense. By all accounts, Aquino remained mentally sharp and philosophically engaged well into his 70s. However, privately, he battled health issues. In the late 2010s, he suffered from a prolonged illness, the exact nature of which was never publicly disclosed, though some friends alluded to complications possibly related to skin cancer. And on September 1st of 2019, Michael Aquino died at the age of 72 after this long illness. In keeping with his and Lilith's private nature, the news of his death was not immediately broadcast. It quietly circulated among Temple of Set members and was noted in San Francisco's public records. Only in 2020 did a broader audience become aware, when obituary notices and reflections by acquaintances like author Mitch Horowitz appeared. Aquino's passing was intentionally low-key. He apparently did not want a media circus or a large funeral, fitting for someone who had experienced the double-edged sword of fame. Mainstream obituaries recognized Aquino as an American political scientist, an army officer, and Satanist. As the final echoes of Michael Aquino's life recede into history, what remains is not a simple portrait of villainy or reverence, but a figure suspended between conviction and controversy. To some, he was a philosopher seeking illumination beyond the boundaries of accepted belief. To others, he was a man who stepped willingly into the shadows most feared to name. Aquino left behind temples of thought rather than stone, rituals of identity rather than conquest, and questions that resist easy answers. In the dim corridors between myth and memory, Aquino's legacy persists. Whispered in occult circles and debated in academic halls, and speculated upon wherever fascination with the forbidden endures. Whether viewed as a visionary, provocateur, or enigma, his story reminds us that the human pursuit of meaning can lead one down paths both illuminating and unsettling. And perhaps this is the truest ending possible. For in the world Aquino inhabited, where symbols carried power, belief shaped reality, and the unseen was treated as profoundly real, endings were never final. They were simply transitions, thresholds, doorways left slightly ajar. Somewhere, in quiet rooms lit by a single candle, his ideas are still read, his words still recited, his name still invoked, and perhaps, just maybe, his presence still lingers. Or perhaps he is reunited with his master. Before we go, I wanted to share my thoughts. First things first, I've noticed that I've had a lot of people upset and or concerned that I've been covering the topic of Satanism, and I do want to say that I am not personally a Satanist. I try to approach covering these kinds of topics not only out of personal interest, but similar to occult and or paranormal cases, I take a scholarly approach. My goal is to inform myself and then to inform and entertain you to the best of my ability, which, assuming you're here, we both find these kinds of things absolutely fascinating. With that being said, and perhaps I should have shared more of my thoughts in my last documentary, which covered Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan, I think when you really break down what most would call modern Satanism, it really depends on the magician's personal beliefs as to if they are worshiping a non-material force in a religious sense, or other transformative means, or if it's just truly performance art, a psychomelodrama of sorts. And whether LaVey was just a charlatan or had truly made a pact with the devil, or both, doesn't really matter. But what is interesting is that we see this divergence within the Church of Satan schism between those who believed in an actual entity or force called Satan and what would later become Set, albeit those are believed to be one and the same, also known as theistic Satanists, and those who believed in the LaVeyan satanic tenets and gave the possibility for otherworldly forces to potentially be at work, but were more in it for non-religious reasons, and those we'd consider to be non-theistic Satanists. Now, Aquino was a fascinating character. I mean, it's not often, publicly anyways, for one to be a ranked military officer via career, one involved in psychological warfare no less, and to be a high-ranking theistic Satanist. To me, and certainly to Mr. Aquino, I genuinely think he believed in Satan, or Set, or Lucifer, all considered to be one and the same in his book, and that he was the master of this world, or a powerful entity that one could communicate with. It's very interesting to study these magical workings and to try and get inside people's heads and understand just what they must have felt to come to these convictions and just what those implications would mean if true. Granted, Aquino didn't view Set as evil, but rather an entity or force that was misunderstood. But with all the evil in the world today, it truly makes one think that whether it's from outside our world or from within men's hearts, certainly with how much anger, sorrow, and despair exist on this plane of reality, it could possibly be feeding into something that we can't see, something that perhaps desires and even derives pleasure from the pain of man. And if that exists, then its opposite, at least with our perceived laws of polarity, must also be true. And you know what that means. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. I am certainly very interested in reading those. I try to answer as many as I can when I can. Thank you guys so much for checking out this latest video. I've been putting together these occult documentaries and they take quite some time to make. That's with all episodes truly. So your patience is greatly appreciated, as well as your support on all the marathons that I've been publishing. I'm just kind of doing what I need to do to blitz the algorithm to keep the business, aka the channel, where it needs to be. And I cannot state this enough. I am truly grateful for each and every one of you and the time that you take out of your day to support me. With that being said, if you liked the video, give it a like, subscribe if you're new here, hype it if you can if you have access to that feature, and leave me a comment below letting me know what you thought about the whole thing. You can also check out my Patreon at patreon.com/mysteryarchives. Or you can visit my store and purchase my books or a whole bunch of other cool stuff in my merch at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com. Other than that, guys, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Make sure to stay safe out there and take care. I'll see you next time.